Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Miss Elizabeth Lowham, introduce herself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth. I have 3 books out, 4th one coming in fall. I love eclairs and ballroom dancing and not leaving my house.
Well, do you ballroom dance in your house then?
Yes, with my husband.
That is a way to do it. We had to do that. Okay, I'm of an age where we had to do square dancing in elementary school in PE.
So did I.
Okay, and we did the electric slide, and there was another one. The Mariana one or whatever. I'm just Mariachi. That wasn't a thing yet. I'm probably butchering whatever that dance was. Macarena. There we go. That wasn't really a thing yet. But when I was in high school, we had to learn to ballroom dance in PE, which was interesting. I'm more of the just slow dance because then you just sort of sway in place a little bit. You know, it looks like you really like each other, and you don't have to know what you're doing.
That's fair, and that's fun, but ballroom dancing is so fun. And you can just do like the 2 basic steps and get by for any dance.
I still basically remember the waltz because that's just a box.
Yes.
You just
that one's good, nice and straightforward.
Right, and you could add make the box turn in circles and get all geometric with it, but you don't have to. You could just do the box. But and then there's some dancing that I did when I reenacted for the Civil War, some period era dances. I don't remember much. I don't remember much of it because it's been 20 years. I just remember I stepped on a girl's feet when I was trying to learn, and she was not happy with me because my boots trumped her period ballroom slippers.
Oh,
so basically, she was wearing socks and I was wearing hard leather period shoes. For some reason, she didn't want to dance with me again. I can never imagine why that happened.
No, can't imagine why.
So how did you get into ballroom dancing?
Same thing. So in my high school, it was an elective, and I was late signing up for classes. And so for my PE credit, I had a choice. I could either do weightlifting or ballroom dancing. So I chose ballroom dancing. And then I just discovered that, yes, very torn, especially because I looked at the weightlifting class and it was literally all boys. I would have been the only girl. And I was like, I'm going to ballroom dance. At a time in my life,
that would have been a reason to do it. You know what? We made fun of the guys that took the home ec at the time, but now and the male cheerleaders. Now looking back at them, they spent all that time with the ladies. I think they were smarter than us.
That's true.
You would have been in the inverse of the dude in the home ec class.
I was way too shy to be the only girl in the boys' weightlifting class. No way. And there were plenty of boys in the ballroom dancing class, so it worked out.
Yeah, I was a little bit more unsure of myself before college and in the military. So I could see in high school, maybe I wouldn't have been as bold. It's easy to have those rose-colored glasses looking backwards.
Yeah.
So do you take classes still for the ballroom dancing or just go off what you know?
I took another one in college because I really enjoyed it. And then my college had 2 or 3 nights a week, they would do ballroom dancing events. And so I would go to those. Sorry. I would go to those and dance with strangers and meet people, which I really enjoyed. But I haven't done any classes since college.
Did you guys have to dress up to do the waltzing or just standard, whatever you were wearing?
For the events, you didn't have to. For my class, when we did performances and stuff, you had to wear ballroom shoes and you had to wear coordinated outfits and stuff, which was fun. I enjoyed that too.
I remember when I think dancing, I remember the Fred Astaire talking about dancing, and his partner was saying she had it harder because she had to do everything he did backwards and in high heels. So that's about the extent of, and that was because I took a film class in college, and so we watched a lot of those old movies and we'd break it down and see some of the behind the scenes stuff, and that line stuck with me for some reason.
Well, fun story. Before my husband and I started dating, we had known each other 2 or 3 days because he was an acquaintance of my roommates. And she got a group together to go to one of those ballroom events. And I was dancing with a different person, a different guy, and he wanted to try these lifts. Yes. Well, my husband and I were barely acquainted. He liked me. I was unaware. So I was dancing with this other guy and he wanted to try some lifts, which I had never done before, but I was like, sure, you know, like, let's try it if you walk me through it. He did not walk me through it. He just wanted to do it. And so the very first lift that he did, he dropped me on the floor. Hurt a lot. And I was like, oh yeah, lifts are fun. This is fun. And so I left the ballroom floor, went to the side, and I talked to my now husband for a few minutes. He had seen the whole thing. He didn't comment on it, but the dance was almost over. And so right after that, we left, and my now husband was the driver. We all piled into his car, except for the guy who had dropped me. He was the last one in, and my husband locked the doors on him. And then he looked at me, and because, you know, this guy was like banging on the trunk, he was like, hey, let me in. And so my now husband looked at me and he said, do you want me to drop him like he dropped you? And he like had his hand to put the car in reverse. Which he was joking, but I was also like, I'm really flattered right now that you not only witnessed that and, you know, hung on to it, but you're still holding a grudge on my behalf. I was like, no, you can let him into the car. But, you know, I started watching this driver very attentively. And within a week after that, we went on our first date.
Nice. So when did swords get involved? Because you have a picture on your author profile, it's on your website with the sword.
Yes.
On the high guard, position is called.
Yes, that was a fantasy photo shoot that I treated myself to as a reward for getting my first book published, and also for my birthday. The two things coincided, which was really fun. But I have always loved swords. When I was a kid, I was that kid where, you know, every Swiffer broom handle, every empty paper towel tube or wrapping paper tube, which was even better, everything turned into a sword. In fact, I would go out in the yard and I would play, like, I've always loved fairy tales. So I would play Cinderella or Snow White or things like this, but I would play them with the twist of, you know, Cinderella really should have had a sword because then she could have solved her problems. So I would be Cinderella out there with a sword that's like, no, stepmother, I am going to the ball and you can't stop me. And don't you dare come close to try to tear my dress because I have a weapon.
I like it. Is this how you got into the alternate fairy tales? Because I looked on your author page. That's some of the stuff you do.
Yes. So my grandma loved fairy tales when I was growing up. She would talk to me about like the original Grimm's and Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales. And she got me some illustrated books. And so I just lived in these growing up. And when I was about 13, I got into fan fiction. Okay. And I was like, oh, I love this idea that we can like take a story and put our own spin on it. And when I started writing books, I realized that fairy tale retellings are a legitimate thing where people would take these old stories that are completely public domain that have been told 100 times before and tell them again. And I thought that was a really interesting challenge because I was like, can I genuinely tell this story that's been told before, but tell it in a way that is interesting enough that people will still want to read it, even if they've read a dozen other versions of the same story. So my first book was a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I, you know, have been told that people really enjoy it and that it's a unique enough spin that it's enjoyable to read, even if they've read a bunch of other Beauty and the Beast retellings, which was my goal.
So one of the trends you see with that, because you see it in some of the classic sci-fis too, like a lot of the War of the Worlds book two, kind of take the trend with some of the retelling is you take over after the story in the first one ends and you tell what happens next is another way to do it. Right. Which is interesting. Beauty and the Beast, though, I learned two things on that because if you watch like a lot of the versions of it, she's prepared to marry the dude when he's in beast form, right? Like she's all. So that tells me all you really need is a library. You don't have to be attractive or, you know, good looking. You just got to have a library and the girls are going to be all over you.
I mean, are you wrong? I don't think so. I think that that's a valid message.
That was my takeaway. I'm told we've interviewed Bill Fawcett, who's an old school author, writes for Bain. But one of the things he told us in that interview is if the mark is if you have 1,000 books in your collection, you qualify it as a library. That's the dividing line. 1,000 plus is where you meet. So now we all have goals in life, and I just need a bigger house so I have room to put all of the books I'm going to get.
That's in my author bio, is that, I dream of a future house with an actual library. When I say that, I'm talking Beauty and the Beast, floor to ceiling requires ladders type
with
library.
rollers on it. Like I want the roller
Yes.
experience. Of
Yes.
course, I'm gonna abuse it and like have games where we like roll around and sword fight with my friends, but still, it does. And you need the dark oak because that just sets the ambiance.
Mm.
And you need a fireplace in there, which fireplace in books, maybe not the best combination, but you still have to have it. You need the leather chair with a little circular desk where you can put your brandy, your cigar, whatever, your Diet Coke. I'm getting older, people. What can I say? But like you definitely need that ambiance, right? Like you got to have that. The other thing I want is a billiards room. I don't even like playing pool, but I want one.
I like playing pool, so win-win, both sides, the aesthetic and the experience.
So what I'm hearing is I need to win the lottery.
Yes.
Okay, so are there any more fairy tale retellings in your future? You think you're going to keep doing more of those?
Yes, I plan to. So the two I have out right now, I have a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and then I have a gender bent Rapunzel, where the girl has to save the stolen prince from a tower. I am hoping to do more in that series, and then I'm also hoping to do more separate. Sorry, what?
Is it his beard she's climbing, or still his hair?
No, the twist is that he has to cut his hair because there's magic and fairies and stuff. She doesn't get to climb his hair, alas. Well, I thought about it. My husband has really long, beautiful Viking hair that's like wavy and everything. I thought about it, but in the end, I didn't.
So the trick with the retelling is to know what version you're using, because certain parts of that we think of as fairy tales are actually the Disney versions of it.
Yes.
And so knowing where those lines are is huge if you're going to do it.
Yeah. Well, like Rapunzel, for instance, I've had people ask me like, wait, so does anybody wind up having babies in this? And I'm like, no, we didn't stay true to the original in that regard. Nobody winds up pregnant with twins. That's in the original, not in this one.
So I have a half Scottish, half German family, and my German grandmother, like I grew up with the Grimm's fairy tale version, and she never liked the Disney version. It was too nice. Like the fairy tales were supposed to be cautionary tales for young people, like color within the lines or else. Yeah. Right? Like that was the whole point of them.
I like both. I like seeing the originals, and then I also like seeing the interpretations. So I think it's interesting to see what Disney did. I think it's interesting to see what retelling authors have done, other movie adaptations that usually aren't as well known. It does bother me when people think that Disney is the gold standard. Like I've had people talk about my Beauty and the Beast retelling where they're like, oh, this person is the Gaston character. And I'm like, there is no Gaston character. This is not, I'm not pulling from Disney's. I'm pulling from the original. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I've heard persuasive arguments that Gaston was actually the good guy.
I've heard some interesting takes on that.
Sometimes people stretch where they want to make the bad guy the good guy just to be contrarian, and I get that. I'm totally for it. But sometimes it just makes sense. And like, he's trying to protect the village. Sure, he's a little bit, egocentric, but he was trying to keep everyone safe from a legitimate monster that captured a girl and locked her in a tower.
Well, also there's that whole argument about how, if we're true to the time period, then we're not very far off from, French Revolution, guillotine. So I've seen the argument, Belle should have chosen Gaston just so that she doesn't die at the guillotine with Beast.
Ooh, yeah. That's right.
Which I think,
there and all that.
Just for the sake of argument, I think things like that are fun. I will say, the Disney live action adaptation, that was one of the big problems I had with it, is I think they made a mistake with Gaston because I don't think that they established him as a villain well enough at the start. I think they had Belle respond to him in a way that audiences would expect because we know that Gaston is the villain, but I don't think the narrative established it well enough. So, sorry, that's a whole soapbox that I could do.
No, that's valid. Like, I think at some level, Hollywood in general, just the film industry has gotten a little bit lazy on the storytelling. They're expecting you to do a little bit more of the work, or nostalgia buy-in, or we're totally doing
playing
something
on audience
new.
expectations.
Yeah, we're totally doing something new and different. We're going to change the race or the gender and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, that's not new or different. That's just the norm at this point. You know,
Well,
like,
and I'm like, casting is one thing, but you're forgetting that you're here to tell a story. Like, you're forgetting the story. We're getting a
absolutely.
lot of movies that are not good storytelling. And I'm like, I don't care who you cast if you don't have a good story that you're telling.
Well, I mean, there's some where it matters. Like Rapunzel, anyone could have the long hair. No. I mean, obviously, this story was written a certain way, but when skin as white as snow is part of it, you kind of, I mean, but what gets me is there's so many other like fairy tales and action adventure heroes that exist outside of like Anglo-European worlds that you could draw on. They just don't.
Yes.
They're lazy about it. Like there's so many cool people in history. Like, why doesn't he have a movie yet? Like, I'd watch the heck out of it.
No, we have fairy tales that have never been made the first time, and yet we're remaking the same ones. And that sounds a little hypocritical of me because I'm over here with Beauty and the Beast and stuff. But I do think that
it's not quite the same thing.
More stories that we haven't seen before.
Like some of the African American soldiers that deployed during World War I and some of their heroics, if you want to highlight that instead of changing history to make a point about racism, which like obviously racism is bad, but if you're going to make a point of it, it's even more impactful if you highlight real people,
right?
Instead of just twisting the narrative and making it something that it wasn't. So I don't know. I was a historian by training, so it bugs me when they get the history wrong. When like a cursory Google search can find you plenty of examples of people that give you everything you wanted, and oh, by the way, it's also true.
Right, it makes it more powerful
and more aspirational because it's not just it's just made up whatever. It's like this was a dude that really did that.
Yeah.
And like as little as my experience was in Iraq, I've had some scenes that I've written where I've put in stuff that happened to me, and editors on the publishing side of like, that's too unbelievable, take it out. And I'm like, well, I can show you the incident report where it really happened, but okay. And then you look at some of the stuff the people in the 2 world wars went through, and you're like, how are they not turning these people into action heroes?
Right.
So it's just my soapbox, but we'll move on. The next part of the introduction, dear listener, is how we found them. And we actually found Elizabeth through friend of the show, Jenna Brown. Although you might know her as Jenna Ray. I'm not sure how you guys met. Probably Superstars. I think that's the convention.
Yeah, we were at Superstars.
Yeah. So was that fun, by the way, that trip?
Loved it. I'm native. I live in Colorado. So It's really nice because Superstars is a local one for me. I get to just drive down, hang out with fellow authors for a weekend. I just love the atmosphere.
Is that another one of those ones where like everyone hangs out at the bar afterwards to mingle?
Yes. There are a lot of outside of the conference activities and hangouts. There's a karaoke night and everything. It's really fun.
Probably best I never sing in public. I don't know that anyone can emotionally recover from that.
I'm sure you have other talents.
I mean, I can spin a good yarn, I hope. All right. Yeah, so
that's essential.
I can. So when people like you get sometimes the trolls or like, the hijacked accounts or whatever ask you what you do for a living. So I always tell them I'm a professional liar because, you're an author, right? I'm a professional liar. And of course, their go-to is, wait, are you a politician or a lawyer? And I'm like, nah, okay. But all right, so the religion question.
I've used con woman before.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, where I'm like, I'm, duping people to believe in this thing, even if you're only believing it while the book is open and the pages are turning.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you give people enough for the willing suspension of disbelief, I'm totally there for it. I want to, when you read a book, you already want to buy into it, or you don't read it, unless you're in school and they're forcing you. But that's a whole nother argument. All right, so before we dive any deeper into this interview, we do have to ask the religion questions. Are you ready for this?
Ready.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Wars.
Okay. It's the lightsaber, isn't it?
No. Okay. So when I was growing up, My mom loved the original trilogy because she shares a birthday with Harrison Ford and she had a huge crush on him. So
Okay.
she would just watch the movies all the time. And I just grew up with that as like part of my like my ingrained childhood. Star Wars was always there. And yes, the swords that I had as a child were very often lightsabers. That is true. But then when I was in elementary school, they started doing the prequel series. And I was so thrilled because up to that point, Star Wars had existed as this thing that was done and complete. And, you know, like my mom would put on the VHS tapes and that was all. And then all of a sudden there was new Star Wars and it was like my Star Wars. Say what you will about the prequels. I have issues with them too, but it was my Star Wars. And the fact that I actually got to go to the theater and see Star Wars movies when I thought that, you know, Star Wars was already a complete thing and now it's not. That was so exciting for me. And then when I got into college, they were doing the sequel series. So I feel like kind of that feeling of like growing up with Harry Potter, where you're waiting for each new book. Even when you have problems with some of them, Star Wars has been with me my whole life and I have grown up surrounded by Star Wars. And so I love it. I mean, I never had the same exposure to Star Trek. And I did watch Firefly in college, but it, you know, not the same kind of exposure.
Absolutely. It was on Fox Entertainment where good shows go to die, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's so sad.
I'm still not over that and Terra Nova. I mean, they had dinosaurs, for crying out loud.
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
Absolutely. All right. So I don't know. The prequels, like, I get why some people didn't like them, and I get in some senses they just kept retelling the same story over and over again. But I mean, it had Natalie Portman, and I was a gentleman of a certain age, and you know, I'm just saying, okay, it's Natalie Portman. All right, we're just gonna move on.
I felt the same way about Hayden Christensen. I wanted a poster of him on my bedroom door. I never got that, but yeah.
Now as an adult looking back, I'm like, wait a minute, she was a lot older than him, canonically speaking. That was a little...
Yeah. There were some interesting storytelling decisions made in the prequels, some of which I still don't support. But like I said, it was an experience. And so to this day, I still love all 9 movies. I stand behind all 9 movies, acknowledging their flaws.
Did you watch the Clone Commandos cartoon and the Rebel?
I tried. I started Clone Wars and I just couldn't. I had a really hard time wrapping my brain around the fact that we're trying to pretend that all of this stuff happened in between 2 movies. And yet, you know, I'm like, no, you can't convince me that Anakin had an apprentice and then all of these things still happen. Yeah. I just couldn't get the lore. And so I ignored it.
They made the apprentice not a thing by the time it interlocked back with the series. Like, that was in the arc.
Yeah, but I'm really big on character things. And I'm like, just adding this much content for people changes people. And I don't know. I didn't like the idea of shoving a new series in between 2 movies that were already done.
Okay. So, did you read any of the
personal problem?
The legend stories?
The only thing that I read, I tried a couple of different books because there are so many Star Wars books out there. The only ones that I read and that I really loved were it's been so long. The Jedi Apprentice chapter books.
Okay.
Like Dave Wolverton, I think, started the series, and then I think it was taken over by someone else. But they were about Obi-Wan as an apprentice with Qui-Gon. And I really, really loved those. I was super into those and tried to find them at my library and had to just settle for holes in the series because they never had every book in the series. But I loved those.
Okay. I really loved the Rogue Squadron, all the X-Wing books because the fighter pilots in space were just cool. I dug the Republic Commando that Karen Travis wrote. I liked a lot of them. The problem was, and we harp on this all the time, but George Lucas never met an idea he didn't say yes to. So unfortunately, that meant canonically, like it's flawed. So I get to a point why Disney couldn't just willy-nilly take all of it, but it would have been very easy to like push together a timeline so it all worked and then re-edit and re-release all of those books and bada bing, bada boom. You've got like 100 titles ready to re-release, get a new lease on life, new audience. You're making money out of a product that's already mostly done. You know what I mean? Like it was just such a wasted opportunity. And Star Wars is a cautionary tale about what happens when the person that takes over the production of the franchise is not a super fan.
Yeah.
Because if they don't like it, then they're always going to try to put their spin on it, and it just rarely works. Because if they don't like it, they don't know what the readers and the consumers like, and you can't honor that.
Yes.
So, all right. Because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh, man. I'm going to go Chronicles of Narnia on this one because this is another foundational childhood thing for me, where, you know, the movie came out when I was, no, I don't remember, when I was in elementary school. And then my mom bought me the omnibus that had all 7 books in one. And she brought that home as a surprise. And I read all 7 books and I just loved them and reread them. The Silver Chair was probably my favorite. I reread that one all the time. And then Prince Caspian. So I grew up with those and they hold a special place in my heart. And I also really, really enjoy C.S. Lewis's writing style. I like the allegories. I like the kind of thick prose, the kind of lyrical prose that he has. I will say, Wheel of Time. Wheel of Time is one of those series where my whole life we've kind of been in a stare down where I'm like, I will read you one day, and I just haven't yet. Now that Amazon is doing the show, my husband and I watched season 1 together, and he got super curious and started reading the book, and he was like, this is not at all the same. You have to read this. So I think it might finally be time for my stare down with Wheel of Time to end and for me to actually dive into that series.
I have tried to read it, and I just couldn't get into the style of Robert Jordan's. Yeah. I watched part of season 1 of The Wheel of Time. My problem with that is I watched The Lord of the Rings when it first came out to DVD and VHS in the early 2000s. And they took costuming and set design and all of the movie production value to such a high level that it puts everything else to shame. And compared to that, watching The Wheel of Time felt like I was watching a high school theater troupe when it came to the costuming. And don't even get me started on the Rings of Power. The AI over was so done where they tried to copy the crowd and like move them around so they looked bigger. I'm like, it was like watching a Where's Waldo, and I could find him 12 times. And so for me, my problem with The Wheel of Time is outside of any canonical lore issues with that and the original source material was just the production didn't raise to the standard that I think it was Peter Jackson that did the Lord of the Rings movies. He set the bar so high that everything after that is just like, really? That's all you got for me? With the costuming and stuff.
2 thoughts. First of all, my defense of Rings of Power is for season 1, it's Elrond and Durin, because I love them so much and the character work is just amazing. And for season 2, it's Celebrimbor and spoilers, the person. Because again, the character work is just so amazing. So yeah, there are production problems. There are some fights in season 2 where I was like, oh no, guys. But I really, really enjoy some of the writing that is happening and some of the one-on-one character things. So overall, I really enjoy Rings of Power, and I'll continue watching that one. Wheel of Time, I go back and forth on. I'm kind of on the fence because they haven't really given me much to hold on to. My husband's liking season 3 a lot more, but I forgot my second thing because now I'm thinking about Rings of Power. Oh well.
I got bored in the first season of Rings of Power. I tried to watch it because I love Lord of the Rings. I tried. I cut my teeth reading The Hobbit. That was one of the first I read. But it was just the storytelling, and I know some people got upset because, like, Lord of the Rings was very much so J.R.R. Tolkien was trying to create like myth and legend for Europeans. and he was excising his demons from the psalm.
Right.
Some people complain that one of the elves was African American actor. Like they're fantasy creatures at the end of the day. Like that didn't bother.
He's the best elf. He is the best elf. Particularly, like if you've watched everything that is out by now, I'm like, okay, nobody elfs harder than Arondir. It bothers me when people have trouble with that casting because I'm like, if you just watch his performance, like he portrays an elf better than any of the other elves in the series.
And if you grew up like with the D&D version of like elf culture, there's like dark elves and you know, forest elves, and like, so the idea that not all the elves have to look the same doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah.
It was more the storytelling really bugged me for some of it, and it just
there's some very weak storytelling. There is.
And how hard is it to look up, do a little bit of research on, you know, medieval warfare and get the tactics right? Like that was my problem with the final fight scene at Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, did you guys like, I mean, come on, I could get a 12-year-old with a video game console design a better battle plan than that. You know, like combined arms is a thing. They knew it back then. We knew it now. And when you see it fail, you see it fail horribly. And you can look at modern examples of that in the Crimea. So seeing them do the tactics so badly, and if you ever get really bored, there's a called the Angry Staff Officer is the podcast name, and staff officers is slot when a officer goes from company level command, they're getting training on the staff corps, and then their next command is going to be like battalion, brigade, whatever. But most of the time, those majors are the most bitter ever because they go get and ever be like king of their castle in the field to desk work, and nobody likes paperwork. Nobody.
Right.
If you do, I would challenge your humanity, and I might wonder if you're a lizard person because nobody likes paperwork. But he did a takedown.
Leslie Knope likes paperwork.
Okay, are we sure they're human? Are we? I mean, have you pricked them to see if there's lizard skin underneath? I've watched.
No.
I know about the fifth column. So like they broke down some of the tactics, and it's interesting. He did the final battles at Helm's Deep. He did the Game of Thrones last season battles. He broke down Rogue One and talked about why it would never work because logistics. You know, that's what it really comes down to is if you don't have.
Which is a shame because Rogue One is such a romp. Like that's such an enjoyable movie.
Well, that one could work the way they do it, but I mean, he had some critiques on like the battle planning. And to listen to actual military strategists like break down, it just was fun. It was amusing.
No, that's cool.
I don't even know if they're still making the podcast. It's been a few years since I've listened. I got into audiobooks since I don't listen to as many podcasts now. Podcasts were cheaper though, because most of those were free. Maybe anyway, but yeah, it's an interesting breakdown.
I remembered my second thing. We were talking about the spectacle of Lord of the Rings. When I watched Dune Part 1, that was the first time where I felt like it was spectacle that matched the same kind of feeling that I had when I first watched Lord of the Rings. Sorry, that was my thought with costuming and with design and stuff.
Okay, I have not seen the Dune stuff. I've seen the original like 1980s movie.
Ooh,
but it's been
80s
so long.
sci-fi.
Yeah, it's a moment in time.
Yeah.
I haven't revisited it, and I've never read the books. I mean, I know I should. Like, it's one of those things I'm working my way through the classics, even if I don't enjoy them, just knowing where we came from. And it's that old expression, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So I'll read the classics, even if I don't enjoy them. Although
it's a shame. Dune is very atmospheric in the writing.
I haven't read it, so I don't, I know enough about it just because you hear people talk. But I will say that sometimes if you have opinions on some of the classics, you will get hate mail for years. So we started the Blasters and Blades podcast in 2017, I believe. This is season 5. So 5 years ago. So 2020, we became the Blasters and Blades. From 2016 to 2020, we were the Sci-Fi Shenanigans before we rebranded and we went and we started doing Fantasy 2. One of our very first episodes in season 1 of the Sci-Fi Shenanigans, so this we're talking 2016, 2017, we did a review of Starship Troopers. And I made the fatal mistake of saying I liked the movie better than the book because the book was more a political treatise. And I read philosophy and I read politics. I revisit Marcus Aurelius's Meditations at least once a year. I read a lot of the early Stoics. So I don't have a problem reading that. But when I'm reading that, I approach it with a different mentality than when I'm reading fiction. And Heinlein's Starship Trooper read more like a political treatise disguised as a novel than an actual novel. Whereas the movie was just a B movie romp in the park. So I enjoyed the movie for what it is. I can accept that it's totally different from the book, but I enjoyed it more than I enjoyed the book because I had expectations going into the book that it was an adventure story, and it really wasn't. I still get hate mail for that episode. I still get people like they're talking like 2016 episode they find, and then they send me letters. So like you have opinions on some of the classics, you will get letters.
Okay, I have to say, I've been writing I've been writing seriously since I was about 15. That was about when I decided I want to write books, I want to publish books. I didn't get published until I was, I don't remember now, 28, 29. I don't know, whatever I am now, minus a few years. But when I published my first book and I started getting the initial reviews coming in and everything, we were waiting for trade magazine feedback. I all of a sudden realized, like, you spend all this time wanting to be published and wanting to have your work out in the world and be able to share it with people. Like, hey, here's this thing that I really love that I poured my heart into, and I hope that you might like it too. And you don't realize how mean people can really be. And people hold grudges. Like that idea that you have an episode that long ago that people are still coming at you for. It is a scary thing to put your opinions or any part of yourself out in the world because people don't hold back.
Letters. People certainly have opinions about writing, and sometimes they're mean just because they can.
Yes.
There is a novel written in the Galaxy's Edge universe by a guy named Doc Spears, who's a legitimate former Green Beret, who now teaches marksmanship for the military as a civilian contractor. And he wrote about the Special Forces unit within this universe because obviously he's writing what he knows. And he added that level of detail to the world, like, making it bigger and more immersive. And in some of the reviews, they're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And clearly he's never worn a uniform. And I'm like, the dude literally wrote the book.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? And then you look at some of the reviews of like some of the best authors of our generation and before, and you read the 1-star reviews and they're like, well, I guess if they're getting 1 stars, mine don't matter as much, right?
Yes.
Like,
it is comforting to know that this is a universal thing.
Although I started writing I took a writing as therapy class through the VA. I was taught by a lady that was a professor at William & Mary. Her husband was a naval officer, was a doctor. And so she did this just because she was floating anyway. And, as an adjunct professor, you've got lots of free time because you're not getting all the good classes. You're just doing the intro. So she was kind of bored, probably. And I remember at the end, I had written sci-fi because it was less visceral in my head than fantasy where, you're up close and personal with a knife or a sword. Mm-hmm. And at the end, like, she's reading it and she's like, this is really good, JR. Have you thought about publishing it? I'm like, no, I have to live more life first. Like, authors are supposed to have like all these vast experiences to write about. And she like smacked me on the back of the head, all Gibbs style. And she's like, I've been to 2 war zones. What more do you want? And that was for me, like, my permission to start. But since then, like, I've seen some of these reviews people get, and I've kept in touch with her. And she's like, whenever you feel down, just remember somebody greenlit Sharknado. And made that movie. And after that, how bad can your writing be?
Right.
And so that's that's what I tell myself whenever I get those bad reviews.
That's a good adage.
Right? Like, somebody greenlit Sharknado. Although now, like, we could add on to it. We could do like jellyfish and alligators, and we could do like Jellygatornado. And we could add to it. We could make it a thing. Like, why not lean into the ridiculous? So, all right. So one of the crying shames of adulthood, and clearly I haven't grown up yet by this conversation, but one of the crying shames of adulthood is we stop asking each other the important questions. So we are bringing that back thanks to our sponsors here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. So what is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur is a Triceratops. which is 100% the result of growing up on the land before time and just loving Sarah and her sassiness.
Yes, absolutely. I loved the Triceratops too for that very reason. You can almost tell by people's dinosaur choices if they grew up with that movie, because they'll pick the ones that are they'll pick the ones that show. I also watched Land of the Lost was another big one. And there were a few from the 80s that where they found the fictional land. I think that was Land of the Lost. There were a couple of them where they find anomalies where the dinosaurs still existed. There's a lot of B movies on late night TV that were pretty formative for me. All right. And so finally, we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle dragging troglodytes. So coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
So, fun fact, I am allergic to caffeine.
What? How are you an author?
Yes.
I mean, are you allowed? Did they let you in trade unions?
It can be rough sometimes, I just got invited to a conference that is called Literature and Lattes. And I had to respond and tell them I'm so honored. I would love to be part of it, but you can't give me lattes while I'm on panels.
Literature and Lattes is the group that owns Scrivener.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember.
I did not know that.
When I got Scrivener, that was part of the group you could join. And it was affiliated at one point in time with NaNoWriMo before that organization went bust. It's a really, at least at the time, it was a pretty thriving author community of mostly amateur authors doing it for fun, talking back and forth. But yeah, Literature and Lattes is such an awesome name. That could be a cafe name.
Yes. It is such an awesome name. Well, and it reminds me of that new cozy fantasy, now of course it's gone from my mind, but it's the one with the cover with the orc, and it's really cute and sweet.
I think Whatever. It's Legends and Lattes. Is that it?
Thank you. Yes, Legends and Lattes. But yeah, no, I'm allergic to caffeine, so no. Thank you. Yeah, no coffee or tea for me. Really, I don't, and no sodas or anything. I don't do drinks in general. I drink water and I drink milk. I'm so boring. Yeah.
Have you seen that Karate Kid movie where it is this kid with asthma and he's daydreams all the time and he ends up meeting Chuck Norris? Is one of the movies from the 90s. And that was one of the things. They have a scene where he goes into the bar in a Western and he asks for milk, and the whole bar stops to stare at him. It's gonna bug me that I don't remember the name of that movie now. Like I said, I'm a sucker for a good B movie.
Hey, they're fun. Well, that would be me. I would be the person at the bar asking for milk. Well, and we talked about superstars and stuff like that. Whenever I do go to these hangouts or where people want to hang out at the bar, I'm like, man, I can't even, because I don't like carbonated water or anything. I'm not used to drinking carbonated things, so it just hurts my throat and my eyes. So I can't even just get the normal, I don't know, whatever that's called, soda, water, any of that stuff. I just don't drink.
Maybe it was Sidekicks. I could be wrong. I'm gonna have to Google that one. Yeah, Sidekicks is the Chuck Norris.
Sidekicks.
But yeah, he has a scene in his imagination because he has asthma, so he's living in his imagination a lot. And then of course when he meets Chuck Norris in this movie, who's an action hero, obviously, he realizes, hey, if I exercise, asthma doesn't have to define my life. And so it's him rediscovering himself through karate. But the 90s were there was a lot of karate movies in the 90s. So, but we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the woman and the man, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about your books.
Are you searching for an epic new fantasy book to read? Well, look no further. Try out Spring for Spears, where the fate of the Wolf Riders falls on an outcast. Astrid would give anything to be one of the Ulfsark, the fearless warriors who ride giant Amarak wolves. Like her ancestors, she yearns for the soul-deep bond with a wolf, the connection, the union, a chance to prove her worth and honor her mother's legacy. Yet, she's never heard the wolf song, and with each passing year, it's likely she never will. Except, Astrid refuses to accept her fate. Then, an encounter with a nature spirit and a foreign princess dashes her last hope and changes everything. Will Astrid save a fragile peace and embrace her destiny? Or will her dreams of the wolf song fade to distant lands? Join Astrid and friends on a thrilling new fantasy adventure in A Spring for Spears, the first novel in the Wolf Song saga, a series by best-selling, award-winning authors Katie Cross and Derek Allen Sidaway.
All right. Thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And now we're going to bring you back on to talk about your book, Casters and Crowns. I almost said crows, but that's not it.
It's the crow on the cover. It's very misleading.
Well, when I get it wrong, sometimes anthologies are written. I'm sure you know Melissa McShane if you were at Superstars, because she did at one point in time.
Right.
But she's from your side of America, on the western side. You know, the weird places west of the Mississippi. She has a series it's a lit RPG series called War Master. And I kept saying War Hamster on accident, and then it became a running joke. And now we're putting together an anthology and a series based on it. So if I keep saying Casters and Crows, someone's going to want me to write it. And my dance card is full. So what is the origin of Casters and Crows? How did you come up with the idea that became this series, or this story, excuse me?
So there are two things that mainly inspired this story. The first one, I talked about being the girl with the sword, and this is going to sound really funny considering that. I spent my whole childhood being Cinderella with a sword and saying you should fix your problems this way. And then I, became a teenager, graduated high school, left the house, had to be out on my own being an adult. And I realized, actually, I would like the world to be just a little bit kinder. Because things are really hard. And I realized that I am not a very tough heroine. And if I were in a fantasy world, I probably would not be the girl out there solving problems with swords, because I prefer to be nice to people and I prefer people to be nice to me. So I was, I think I was about 19 when I started writing this story. And I was reading a bunch of fantasy books at the time. In YA fantasy, the trend was very much to have the sort of Black Widow type heroines, where she's an assassin and she's a master of all these weapons and she doesn't need a man. And a lot of those stories were really fun for me. But at the same time, I was like, none of these heroines are reminding me of me. And so I wanted to write a book where the heroine could solve problems in a way that didn't involve weapons at all. I wanted her to speak to me and to be more personal for me. I wanted her to be sensitive and be able to be strong, but not strong in a masculine way or in a weapon wielding way. So I sat down to write a story with a main character who solved problems without weapons, which turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be, to write a fantasy story where you don't solve the problem by winning a big final fight. The second thing that inspired this book is that when I graduated high school and I moved states for college, I spent a little bit of time living with my aunt, who was someone who I loved dearly. But when I was living with her one-on-one, she made a couple of very deeply racist remarks that were very offhanded for her. But for me as an 18-year-old, it was my very first experience up close with prejudice. I grew up in a really small farming town. I was pretty sheltered. And this was a really hard thing for me to not only come face to face with racism, but to come face to face with it from a person who I really loved and a person that I really admired. And so that was kind of hard for me to grapple with. Like, is my aunt still a good person if she has these beliefs about people without even meeting them? And this story, casters, who are the magic users in the world, there's prejudice against them. They're registered and they're branded within the country just for having magic. And there are all these beliefs, you can't trust a caster, you can't touch a caster. This whole group of people have just been isolated and been labeled with certain ideas and beliefs by the people who are different from them. And so when I was writing this book, those were the two things that I was grappling with, was, trying to have a heroine that was kind and trying to understand prejudice and grapple with the idea of how do we overcome it? How do people reset these deeply rooted mindsets and so on.
Okay. So with that as the theme underlying this story, what would you say the age range for readers would be?
So this is a very non-graphic book. There's violence that happens. It is not graphic. There's no profanity and there's no spice content or sexual content. It is a romance, so there are a few kisses. But in general, I would say that it's appropriate for ages 13 and up. And I think that it can spark some very important conversations, but it doesn't stray into uncomfortable or graphic territory. And I've had a lot of moms actually talk to me about the book and say that they read the book just for themselves. They were interested in it. And then they got really excited and they shared it with their teenager. The other day, I got a thank you note from a 12-year-old boy who had read it and he really, really liked it. And he wrote me a note about all his favorite things in the book, that was definitely, like an author merit badge for me. One of those things that you dream about happening. Yeah. But in general, I say 13 and up.
I had to ask because it's listed on Amazon as YA, but YA doesn't mean what it used to mean. There's so many people that call themselves YA where the book's pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
Genre is just a construct as far as like how we categorize books, so we can find what we're looking for. So I'm not even that bent out of shape, but with YA, you kind of have to ask, because if you tell me it's a middle grade book, I know what to expect.
Right.
If you tell me it's a spicy book, I know what to expect. When you tell me it's YA, that's such a broad term.
And the genre has really shifted of late because there are all these outliers that are just kind of squeezing into it. And it has become this amorphous shape that doesn't really have a good definition anymore.
Yeah, it's weird. And I don't know when that happened. At one point in time, like YA was like, that's what you read if you're not mature enough to read like Stephen King or David Eddings or, the grown-up books.
Right.
So for most of us, we went from chapter books in, elementary school to the proper, what we would call proper novels. And YA was just for people that just couldn't keep up, right? It was supposed to be simpler, was the idea. And it wasn't really a thing anyone intentionally went towards. In fact, some books that are classified as YA now weren't when they were published. But then that kind of shifted and things got so graphic that you got even adults that wanted books that weren't intentionally overly sexual or overly graphic on the violence or weren't just gun porn. And so they started writing toward that audience. Like most people reading YA are actually adults.
Yes.
And I don't have a problem with that. But then somewhere recently, I started noticing the YA is going back towards the direction people reading YA were trying to get away from. So it's like, okay, what do you mean when you say YA? It's that old line. You keep using that word. I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Right. Yeah. All of my books are YA. And for me personally, as an author, my goal is I am trying to write the books that I would have loved as a 16-year-old. That's my North Pole guiding star. That's what I try to do with all of my books. A book that I would have loved as a 16-year-old.
You were a sheltered 16-year-old because I was reading a lot of stuff when I was 16. Like, I remember I got in trouble in 4th grade for reading Stephen King, in class when I should have been doing my work. Now, admittedly, I didn't like Stephen King. I was capable of reading. I was even capable of understanding it. I just didn't like it. I did it more for shock value. But
you were a rebel.
I was, but I was the kid who was always sneaking the novel behind the textbook.
I did that too, but the novels I was sneaking were like Maniac McGee by Jerry Spinelli.
Yeah, well, I mean, so were you reading, was it like the Babysitter's Club, the Box Kids?
No, I never really did those. I loved Animorphs. That was my quintessential sci-fi series that I followed.
Okay.
And then I really loved Ranger's Apprentice. That was a series that I followed as a teenager. I loved all of the Shannara books by Terry Brooks.
Absolutely.
Loved those as a teenager. I actually read a ton of epic fantasy as a teenager that I really, really enjoyed, like the Rhapsody series. Dampier. Wow, I haven't thought of that book in a long time. just all the epic fantasy that my library could offer me.
Yeah, that's one of the things that kids these days will never. Kids these days, when the minute you say that expression, you automatically labeled yourself as an old.
Yeah.
But so like when I was a kid, first
I'm
off,
only 32.
10 years older than me. When I was a kid, like it was still Dewey Decimal System, so you had to work for it. There was no Google to cheat, and let alone Google now, where it's got the AI underwriting. Although I do like it because there was a book I read as a kid, and I was able to find it just by describing it and adding more and more descriptive details that I remember, because I couldn't remember the title and I couldn't remember, the author, but I could remember the plot lines, and I was able to find a book that I'd been looking for years. Even more efficient than find my book on the Reddit subthread, where you can describe a book and they'll help you track it down.
Right.
So I mean, I'm not anti post Dewey Decimal, but like at a certain point in time, you ran out of books in your library, and if the librarians didn't know about it and it wasn't in their system, you just weren't going to find it. So I would read outside of my comfort zone, so to speak, just because it was what was there. Right. Whereas nowadays people are so niche in their reading that they don't ever cross the line. They don't cross the picket line to the other side and read what's over there, which I think there's value in being widely read and broadly.
I think so too.
Topics.
I got an English degree in college, and one of the things that I really liked was taking different literature classes that had me read things that I normally would not have. I liked being pushed out of my comfort zone in that way. And I read a lot of things that I'm grateful I did that I wouldn't have had exposure to otherwise.
Yeah, and like I said, it's formative for me, and it was, it's just one of those things where, I do think it colors your perception of stories. But speaking of stories, so Castors and Crows is the kind of story you wanted when you were that age as a young woman, kind of learning about life. Beyond that, as the starting point in the situation with your aunt, is there any other impetus that gave you the story, or was that it? That where you started?
There was one other thing. So I told you that I got into fan fiction when I was about 13 or so. And I wrote for years mostly on a really old website called fanfiction.net that is still around today, but is quite dated. And I just dated myself by listing it. I had a fellow author on there that I would chat with really regularly. And she wrote almost exclusively for a fandom called The Cat Returns. And once upon a time, we were talking about stories for this fandom. And I sat down and thought, hey, I'm going to write one. Like, I love her stories so much. And I love this movie. It's a Studio Ghibli movie. I'm going to write a story for it. And I sat down and tried, and I just couldn't get into it. But when I wrote Castors and Crowns, I actually adapted part of that story into this one. So the biggest carryover, if anyone has seen A Cat Returns or The Cat Returns, you're going to know now. As soon as I said it, you're going to be like, oh, the biggest carryover is that there's a character in The Cat Returns named Baron. And then in my book, the main love interest name, his nickname is Baron. Everybody calls him Baron. Really nothing else stayed, nothing else carried over, but that was a remnant that carried over. Other than that the rest of the story I just had to develop, but those were kind of the three legs of the stool that this story sprouted from.
Is this a series or a standalone right now?
So this is a standalone. Trick question. This is a standalone, but it's also part of a series. So the next book in the series is called Sonnets and Serpents.
Give me just a second. I'll throw that up on the solo screen so you can show the cover or the book.
Thank you. Sonnets and Serpents.
The proof copy?
This is the ARC. This is the advanced copy. It is not final print.
It looks good. Can you show that cover one more time so people know what to look for?
Thank you. Yeah, it's got a big old snake on it. Sonnets
and you kept the theme.
Yep.
I like the cover theme. That works.
So these are part of a series, but they're both standalone novels. They follow different characters, and I'm hoping to do another one in the series that will follow a different set of characters. But you'll see crossover in the setting. You'll see character cameos. You'll see little Easter eggs if you've read both books.
Okay. So what else can you tell us besides the fact that the world, what can you tell us about the main character?
For casters?
Yes.
Yeah. So I accomplished my goal. This is a heroine who solves her problems without swords. Arya is crown princess. She's destined to inherit this kingdom, but she's worried that this kingdom is fractured and on the verge of civil war between magic users and non-magic users. And she wants to find a way to bridge that. And she and her father have very different ideas about how that should be bridged. The current king is of a mindset that monarchs can't ever admit mistakes because that would make you a weak monarch. Whereas she's of the mindset that they need to change the entire kingdom and the way that it's run. And so there are these beautiful themes about conflict within family. This is a young adult book, and so it's about Arya coming into her own and trying to figure out how to be an adult separate from her father and her father's expectations of her. There are some great sibling bonds in the story. The love interest, as I said, his name is Baron. He's responsible for twin brothers that he has to look after. They are a riot and a half. They're very mischievous and they get into trouble, and they are just a ton of fun. So there are sibling bonds. The story is about healing from past mistakes and learning how to be better in the future. Those are some of the main themes.
So redemption arc is partly central to this.
We'll say even for some of the antagonists, sometimes the question isn't how do we defeat someone who's against us, it's how do we inspire someone who's against us to see or to challenge their own way of thinking.
That's a lost arc, or a lost art, is to have the antagonist not necessarily be a bad guy. Sometimes you see that in war. Sometimes the guy you're fighting is just doing the same thing for the other side.
Yeah.
And so it's go ahead.
Sorry. That was something that I did want to do in this book. Initially, when I sat down to write it, I just had in mind a traditional fantasy where I was like, we're going to have a bad guy. We're going to defeat the bad guy. And then when I was writing it, I realized that I couldn't do the kind of heroine that I wanted to do without having everyone in the story be nuanced, complicated people. Like if I wanted her to be realistic to me in my real life, then I needed everyone in the cast to be realistic to the way that I see people and the way that I interact with people in my real life. And so in the end, we got very nuanced antagonists, and there are multiple of them in the book. And part of the story is coming to understand why they're doing what they're doing, even if you still disagree with the actions.
So do you foresee telling stories then if you get the antagonist to become more of a good guy, where they're going to get their own novel at some point?
Oh, that would be fun. Not at the moment, because like in this book in particular, all of the antagonists are adults. And since we're writing young adult stories, they probably won't become the main character because young adult stories center around young adults. But that is something that I would love to do with a story in the future, maybe as I branch out as an author.
Or if the adults bad guys had kids, you could almost have them clearing dad's name kind of thing by doing the opposite, crawling out.
Well, now you're spoiling book 3.
Oh, oops. No, this is giving me a lot of vibes. Have you seen the TV series Shadow and Bones?
Yes. Oh, I loved it. I'm so sad that one got canceled. It's different from the books, but that one was good.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed too because I wanted more. But this is giving me the same sort of vibes as that, with the way the magic was treated.
That is, Shadow and Bone is a great comp for my series. So, yes.
Okay. Was that intentional?
No, because I wrote this before I had seen or read Shadow and Bone, but we are in the same genre. And I love Leigh Bardugo's writing.
Okay. So what can you tell us about the antagonist without spoilers, obviously?
So the antagonist, you learn right away, her name is Widow Morton. And she declares war on the king in the very first chapter. And then as Arya investigates, she has to uncover the real reasons why. Because the widow declares war on the king, and she says it's for certain reasons. And Arya just doesn't believe that it's actually for those reasons. And so she has to unravel the real mystery of Widow Morton's motivations.
Now, does she have the power behind her to make that war happen?
She's a caster. She is a fluid caster who casts a blood curse on Arya. Again, right at the beginning. These are our inciting incidents.
Okay. Is Arya
fun magic in this book?
Absolutely. Is Arya also a caster or no?
Nope. Arya has no magic. Because again, I wanted, when I was thinking about swords, I wanted that to be literal. But also, once I had developed this magic system and everything, I thought, I don't want my main character to have the magic either. I want her to feel like she's weaponless or defenseless, but she still has to find a way to solve things.
I mean, when in doubt, stab him in the face does work.
But not in this book. That's not how we solve problems in this book. The male love interest, Baron, he is a caster.
Okay.
And he is Arya's only hope of working through her situation, but she doesn't know if she can trust him because he's a caster. And so they have to work to understand one another.
Now, how did the Baron and the main character, how did they meet?
So Baron is part of the court. He's part of the lower court, and he's the only caster within court, which means he gets a whole bunch of unique prejudice. Yay, Baron. And so he goes to an event at the castle where the crown princess is in charge. They cross paths. They have kind of an unfortunate first meeting where they make poor impressions on each other, and then they have to navigate that.
So what is the lower court? I don't think I've heard that expression before.
So Arya is crown princess, and the court of Loegria is divided into an upper court and a lower court. The upper court is the king's council. They're the ones that he meets with, that he uses to decide all of the big important things in the kingdom. And then the lower court are the people who are born into nobility, but they're just not considered as important. They're everybody else in the nobility.
So lower court is nobility who haven't proved themselves to be useful, and the upper court are nobility who are also useful.
Well, they're nobility that the king has chosen and acknowledged.
Yes. Okay. So do you go into the backstory of how Baron, if he's a caster in a world where those are prejudiced upon, how he gets into the court?
So he's just born into nobility. And caster bloodline is something that you're just born into as well. His dad made some decisions that the king did not approve of in terms of choosing a wife, which is how you got caster bloodline mixed with a nobility bloodline.
Okay. Does it always breed true, or is this one of those things that skips generations, or how does that work?
Yeah, this is so casters. If you're part of a caster bloodline, there's the possibility that you will be a caster, but not the guarantee.
If you're part of a caster bloodline, but you don't have caster magic, are they still prejudiced against?
So they have these things called casting tests. They administer one when you're 13 and one when you're 17. If you pass the one when you're 17, then there's no problem because you'll never be a caster after that. If it doesn't activate by the time you're 17, it won't.
Okay. But if your parents were casters and you're not, would they still be looked down upon in society, or is that sort of a middle area?
It's kind of a middle area. It depends on the person. But in general, you're really only prejudiced against if you have the brand, if you're branded as a caster.
That sounds painful.
And I did that. Yeah. Well, and I did that on purpose because I wanted it to be a visual symbol. It's not very subtle, but it's a stand-in for race. I just wanted it to be something where, people judge others by taking one look at them and they see some kind of visual cue. And especially, since this is a young adult novel, like I said, I hadn't had experience with racism until I was 18, but I'd had experience with prejudice. You go to high school and you see kids ostracizing other kids because they take one look at them and, they have, they don't have the right clothes, or they don't have the right hygiene, or just any other thing where you take one glance and you judge a person and then you base all of your interactions on that person with that on that judgment rather than on the actual person.
Now, what is the brand? What does it look like? Have you described it, or?
Mm-hmm. So it's not super fancy. It's just like an elongated S. It's just a mark on the side of their neck.
what made it an S? I would have assumed C for caster, but
yeah, it's not actually an S, but that's kind of the shape. There is no reason for that. That just when I was sitting down to describe it, I was just like, sure, it can be this.
Reason enough. I wasn't sure because you got the crow on the cover in the crown, and so I was like, well, maybe the crow's the mark of the caster, but then there's a coffee cup behind it or underneath the crow, so I was wondering like the significance.
Fun fact: every element on the cover makes an appearance in the story or is important in the story somehow. I've had people tell me that my cover is kind of a fun, find and seek type thing, and it really is.
So there are leaves, which means there's trees in your world. Big shock. Crowns, the title, also shocking. The crow and the coffee cup, though, or maybe a teacup. I guess it's the same.
It's a teacup.
Did you, when you based the kingdom, were you using any historic model as an example, or just kind of generic fantasy malaise that we have as a fantasy idea of what medieval culture looks like Ren Fair vibe?
Yeah, so first book takes place in Loegria, and Loegria is 100% based on kind of your medieval England. That's the inspiration for the court structure, for the nobility, everything else there. The second book, Sonnets and Serpents, takes place in a country called Pravasat, which is loosely based on Turkey. So we get to shift from, very English vibes into Middle Eastern vibes. Which was really fun. It was really fun for me to do. And I did a bunch of research on, historical England as well as historical Turkey. And it was a lot of fun.
Definitely different building structures too. You're going to see more minarets in the Turkey. Colors.
Book 2 is also interesting because Pravasat is a country that doesn't discriminate against magic users. And so their architecture is greatly influenced by stone casters, a specific type of caster. So you also see different, cultural and architectural influences from the magic.
So in this world, you would think every culture that doesn't discriminate against the casters is at an advantage because now the casters want to move there and take their talents, when we talk about it in modern terms, we call that the brain drain from a socioeconomic standpoint. You're going to end up with that. And now you could potentially, with your knight in shining armor, be facing, waves of magic users. That could be bad. So do you have that, almost an Underground Railroad vibe of people escaping the kingdom elsewhere?
Yeah, so in Casters and Crowns, as the prejudice increases, specifically from the king, as he gets a little more zealous going after casters, you do see a mass exodus of magic users from Loegria. There are reasons. I tried to make this as realistic as possible in terms of, this country sucks for magic users in certain ways, but it's also good in other ways. For example, Pravasat, the country in the second book, it has freedom for magic users, but it is a war-torn country that cannot keep a government. Very like French Revolution, like their government is constantly being overthrown, cities are being burned down. It is not a good place to live, even though you would have freedom for magic. And so there are pros and cons to leaving the country and to trying to find freedom. And, Loegria has big flaws, but it also has big benefits. One of those being that it's a very peaceful country where you can be safe for the most part.
I mean, if you've got enough magic users, you could claim a region of space and call it Caster Central or whatever, Okay. So
well, and you see some power politics in the second book about, what happens if you get a lot of magic together in a country where the government is unstable. Yeah. But that's spoilers for the second book.
On a scale of Disney to Machiavelli, where does that concept go?
Ooh, we're still on the Disney side of things. I really wanted to keep this. I wanted to keep this friendly, but also without oversimplifying. I tried to make this realistic, but not graphic. Realistic, but not Machiavelli.
Okay. So let's talk about the magic itself then. So obviously everyone knows about magic if you've got some sort of test for it. Is it all elemental magic then? Because you've mentioned stone casters and water casters.
So casters are divided into 3 types. You have fluid casters, you have stone casters, and then you have a mythological third type that went extinct that nobody really knows anything about. And I can't say anything more because spoilers. So the book mostly deals with fluid casters and stone casters.
Okay. What is the limitation of a stone caster with stone or a fluid caster with fluids? Is it the imagination, or is there spells, or is it just I'm going to enforce my will on the magic and it'll do what I want? Like, how do you envision the magic working?
So the limitations have mostly to do with the person themselves. I'm so sorry. I got a text that I had to check because it was going to tell me whether someone was coming to my house tonight or not. The limitation has mostly to do with the magic user themselves. So magic is draining on the person. And if they overexert themselves, it's like trying to lift a weight that is too heavy. Like there are certain things that you just won't be able to do if you don't have the magical strength for it. And if you really try to force it, you're just going to injure yourself. So one of the interesting things about Baron is that he has a lot more magical strength than others, which has to do with the age that he was activated as a caster, because he was activated younger than anyone else in the kingdom. But for him, he's held back by self-doubt. He has something went wrong with his magic in the past, and he's still holding on to that. And so he doesn't let himself exercise his magic. Whereas, we have some other characters in the story. We have a stone caster who, tries to do something or is asked to do something and is not able to because she just doesn't have that kind of magical capacity. So personal capacity is the limit.
Okay. Well, there's a lot I'd like to ask, but it sounds like the way you structured this story, most of those questions would be spoilers, and we don't do that here. So instead
I really, really love character stories. My first and primary focus is always character. So the magic system is going to flow out of character. The setting generally revolves around character. So it is tricky because usually that means that all of that is wrapped up in details that you can't reveal, that you just have to discover.
And it's totally like we're big on reading here, so we don't want to ever give people an excuse not to read the book, right? So we don't want to give spoilers. And if we do, it's because it's old, people. Come on, after 20 years, you don't have to worry about spoiling. We get letters. I'm just saying, we get letters. All right. So obviously, there's not a lot else we could discuss that wouldn't go into spoiler territory. Is this available in audiobook?
This is, and I'm so excited about this one because they actually gave me dual narrators.
Okay.
So all of Aria's sections are narrated by Jess Moran, who is amazing, and I just adore her. And then all of Baron's sections are narrated by Nick Mondelli, who did an amazing job. I love this audiobook. I listened to it myself and gave it 100% stamp of approval. You can find it on Audible. It's on Deseret Bookshelf Plus and some other sites, I'm sure.
Is this a wide novel or is this Amazon only? For
wide.
Okay.
So you can order it through barnesandnoble.com. You can find it on shelves in Deseret bookstores. You can get it through Amazon.
So if someone has a audio platform that's their preferred, because I've seen that happen before, would they, request it to get uploaded there through you or through the publisher? I don't know if this was your publishing or a small press.
This one is through a traditional press. This
Okay.
one is through Shadow Mountain. And so there's information in the book or just on Shadow Mountain's website you can request, and they have a whole team of people who handle that for me, which is lovely.
Because, as people get sick of some of the policies on Amazon, you're seeing a few more Audible type competitors popping up, including just buying it directly from the website of the author or the publisher through BookFunnel. So, I know some people have very specific ways they want to listen to audiobooks, and we try to help them find that where possible.
Right. So, which I really support. I think it's great to be able to buy it. When anything you can buy straight from the author is awesome.
Yeah, they get more.
I don't have that ability with my books, but I support that.
Yes, as long as I don't have to do the back end work, I have minions for that. So,
right.
As we wrap this up, is there anything else we didn't talk about that you think we should know? Because I know you're on a time crunch.
The only other thing, so my other series starts with the book Beauty Reborn. I don't think I ever mentioned the title. I just talked about it as a Beauty and the Beast retelling. That one also has an audiobook, also a fantastic narrator, Taylor Meskimen. She did an amazing job. And that one is really short. So if you wanted to test me out and you don't want to do a big commitment, that one is a 200-page book, or I think it's a 6-hour audiobook. Casters and Crowns is a little beefier. I think it's 400 pages.
Nice.
But
so about
it's
10, 12 hours of audio.
Yep. And it is worth every page, I promise.
Okay. So this is the part, dear listener, dear viewer, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right books. So do your part, people. It really does matter. And with that, how might listeners and viewers track you down and stalk you on the interwebs, as one does?
Best is through my website, elizabethlowham.com. You can contact me directly through there. I love to hear from you. I'm also on social media. I'm most active on Instagram, at Liz Lowham on Instagram, but I have a Facebook page. I have a TikTok. I love to hear from people. If you review the book, tag me, unless you're mean. If you're mean, feel free to share your opinion, but please don't tag me.
Okay. All right. So you're actually old enough to get where the please be kind and speak your mind comes from. Could give you a chance to guess it. You figure it out?
Please be kind and speak your mind. I don't know that one. I don't.
Please be kind and rewind was at every Blockbuster.
Oh, please be kind.
So when I was writing the section at the end, the call to action for people to review books because it matters, I was like, I bet I could make that work. And I just went with it.
Right. I love that. Oh, Blockbuster. That was where I got all my movies when I was a child.
Same. The running joke was they're going to actually come and ask for those final, because when they closed so suddenly, so many people owed them money in either late fees or, unreturned products, that it's a running joke where, the political powerhouses that be are like, oh, that, that money for the Publishers Clearinghouse or, Blockbuster and all those companies that you need to get. Was it the Columbia House that did the CDs? That most people never actually paid for. Such a bad business model. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. This is you can find us, dear listener, on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/ Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things: the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTubes, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Spotify, the Discord. We have a Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, the Twitter, and the email. These episodes aren't free to produce, and you could help support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section, this is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it flows out of their eyeballs, people. And you can get some of that coffee yourself. Use the code podcast grunts. The link is in the show notes. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. You're shopping local. That matters too. And if you need free shipping, because that does cost, unfortunately, if you buy it on Amazon, we get nothing. But if you just put in the comment section, the Blasters and Blades podcast sent you, maybe they'll send us free stuff too, because I could always use more coffee. They already have my firstborn with all I've bought from them. So, maybe I need an intervention on my own side. And with that, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy and absent co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. All right. Thank you for coming on, Elizabeth. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to have you back.
I had so much fun.
To potentially have you coming on for some panels and stuff too, because we do have to schedule one for YA as a discussion panel. So you almost Taylor wrote yourself into that field. And with that, I'm going to hit the end button. Wait for it. Don't cuss yet, Elizabeth.